If you're an AQA A-level business student looking for a video to revise all of Unit 4 operations, well, this video is for you. Because we're going to go through everything that you need to know for your exams, including what labour productivity is. We'll also go through capacity utilisation and how to calculate this. We'll even go through the different methods of lean production, such as just-in-time and Kaizen. We'll then have an overview of quality and the difference between quality assurance and quality control. And to finish off the session, we'll have a look at our supply chain and our inventory control charts. Let's get into it. The first topic of this revision video that we're going to take a look into will be the different objectives that a business may set in regards to their operations. Now, we've got several different ones, and what we're going to do is we're going to explain each of them, starting off with costs. Now, a business may aim to reduce its unit cost over time, which essentially is just how much does it cost to produce each individual unit. Now, Michael Porter argued that this could give a business a competitive advantage, and we'll take a look at Porter's strategic matrix in our year 13 units, but essentially he said if you are running a low cost strategy, you either have the highest profit margins or you can reduce your price to the lowest point while still maintaining profitability. Now, different ways a business could achieve cost efficiency could be economies of scale. They could just improve their efficiency in their operations. They could also look at lean production and look to minimize their waste, and also including more automation in their production, so maybe looking at a more capital intensive approach. And we're going to go through all of those different concepts throughout this video. The next operational objective could be around improving quality. Now, quality is the degree to which a business meets or exceeds their customer expectations. Now, quality objectives will be very different across different businesses based on what industry they're in. So for example, a manufacturing business, they may aim to minimize the number of defects in their production. Now, why a business should focus on improving quality? Well, first of all, it should improve your customer satisfaction, which can improve customer loyalty and repeat purchases. It could also improve your branding, and if you have a stronger brand, your products may now be viewed as price inelastic, which that could give you the ability to charge higher prices and increase your profit margins. Next up we've got is speed of response, and essentially this is how quickly a business can provide products or services to their customers. And this could relate to order lead times or just how long it takes a product to be delivered to you. So for example, with a restaurant, how long does it take for you to be sat down and to receive your meal? Now, to improve your speed of response, you've got to think about including automation and technology, optimizing your supply chain, training your employees so they've got more skills, and of course reviewing your process to look at improving efficiency. The next operational objective that we have is flexibility, and this is the ability of a business to quickly adapt its processes and production to changes in demand, customer preferences, or any other external factors. It basically looks into how quick can the operational department react, because the aim is to continuously meeting customer needs more effectively. And flexibility will be an important operational objective for these different businesses who operate in a dynamic market, which is just a market that is characterized with lots of change. So for example, fashion businesses, they're going to have to continuously adapt their product lines to meet the changing needs, to meet the changing trends within the market. We could also look at environmental objectives within our operations, so making sure the business has good business ethics, because this is now becoming more and more crucial in today's business world. And we'll take a deeper look at this across our Unit 7. But now companies place a stronger emphasis on their environmental impacts. So once again, how can we do this? Well, we could implement lean production. We could look at recycling more. We could look at improving the quality as well of our production so it reduces the number of defects. And overall, can we look at reducing our carbon emissions? And the very last operational objective that we could have is added value. Now, what we mean by added value is when we take the selling price and we minus the cost of inputs. So when the outputs are worth more than the inputs, well, we've then added value. And how we can look at achieving this? Well, first of all, we could look at improving our quality of the product. We could introduce more innovative features. We can invest in branding, because we know if we have a strong brand, we can sell at higher price points. We could also look at enhancing efficiency to minimize those cost of inputs, because a business would want to take all the raw materials and how they produce their product and want to make a profit from there. Now, when we look at added value, as we said, The stronger the added value, the higher the price point the business can charge, which can obviously bring them lots of benefits because we're able to increase our profit margins. Now, the extent of how much we can increase our price, of course, depends on price elasticity of demand, because if we are price elastic, then we may not be able to get away with increasing prices as our customers are more sensitive. But if we have a product that is price inelastic, we know our customers aren't really that sensitive to changes in price, then we can get away with increasing those prices. And as well, if we are adding value successfully, potentially we've created a USP, well, that helps us stand out from our competitors. The next topic that we're going to take a look at in this revision video will be labor productivity. Now, labor productivity is the measure of output per workers, i.e. how much work is each individual worker doing on average. And the way we calculate this is that we take the output during a period of time, could be a week, could be a month, could be a year, and divide that by the number of employees in that period. For example, let's say we have this data. Across that year, we produced 150,000 units as a business, and the number of employees who was working on producing this was 500. All we would do is take the 150,000 divided by 500, which would give me a labour productivity of 300 units per employee. Now, of course, depending on the business, that could be 300 water bottles per employee, could be 300 cars per employee. Now, how high that labour productivity should be depends on the industry that you're in. So, for example, if you're producing a product that isn't really that customised, it's a fairly standardised product, ideally, you want a higher labour productivity. But if you're customizing the product to meet specific customer needs and wants, then labour productivity levels tend to be lower. And the ways a business can look at improving their labour productivity, well, the first one be around motivation. Motivation will typically be the most important way to improve our labour productivity. Now, in Unit 6, we'll look at the different motivational theories, financial and non-financial methods of motivation. And that explains all the different methods of how we can motivate our employees. We can also provide training for them so we're improving their skills. Because if we are able to develop their skills, they should be able to work more efficiently. And finally, look at investing in technology, bringing in more automation and equipment for them to work with. Another really important calculation that we need to do within our operations, and the next topic in this revision video, will be unit cost, also known as cost per unit. Now, it shouldn't be too hard to get your head around this topic, because all unit cost is how much on average does it cost to produce an individual unit. The way we calculate this, we take the total cost of the business, divide that by the total units produced. Now, total cost could also be the total cost of production. Just check for what it says within your exams. Now, the reason why a business would like to reduce their unit costs is because their profit margins could increase, or they could potentially charge a lower price to be a bit more competitive. Now, the ways a business can look at reducing unit cost, first of all, one of my favorite concepts is economies of scale. Essentially, what economies of scale is that as you increase the business's output, i.e. we're producing more units, on average, unit cost begins to fall. We've got several different reasons. We may be able to negotiate a better price point with our suppliers, or we're using more technology, machinery, automation in our production, and we're a lot more efficient. We could also look at lowering our variable costs, so maybe sourcing from cheaper suppliers, using cheaper raw materials. We could look at lean production, more on that later on in this video, and overall improving productivity. Now, when we're building our analysis in terms of why unit cost, there's a magic sentence that I always want you guys to use. I'm going to show you how it works first, then I'm going to give you the sentence. Now, let's say here we've got our units produced increasing in 1,000. Of course, fixed cost is always going to stay the same because fixed costs don't change regardless of the level of output. But of course, our variable costs do. So let's say our variable cost per unit is £5. So of course, when we produce 1,000 units, 1,000 times by 5 gives us a total variable cost of £5,000. And when we produce 4,000 units, 4,000 times £5 again, would give me a total variable cost of £20,000. Now, I want to calculate my total cost. So what I do here is I do the fixed cost plus the variable cost. So for example, for 1,000 units, 10,000 plus 5,000, of course, gives you £15,000. And for 4,000 units, 10,000 plus £20,000 gives me a total cost of £30,000. Now, we want to calculate our unit cost, which remember, take your total cost and divide that by the number of units. So, what we can start to see here is that the more units we produce, the lower the unit cost is. So for example, when we produce 1,000 units, we take the total cost of £15,000, divide that by 1,000 units, gives me a unit cost of £15. But when I do this for 4,000 units, my total cost is £30,000, divide that by 4,000 units produced, gives me a unit cost of £7.50. So what we can see is that the more units we are producing, the level of unit cost should decrease. And that magic sentence is because your fixed costs are spread over more units, which reduces our unit costs. The next topic that we're going to take a look at in this revision video will be capacity utilization. Now, essentially, all capacity utilization is, it's the measure of how effectively a business is using its available production capacity. Which essentially means the higher the capacity utilization, the more effective a business is at using their available resources. And the way we look at calculating capacity utilization is that we look at our actual output, so how many products that we're actually producing, divided by the maximum output, which essentially means what is the maximum amount of products that I could be producing. Now, when we look at an optimal capacity utilization, obviously it depends on the industry, but I would typically say it's anywhere between 80 and 90%. The reason why we don't want it lower than 80% is because, of course, we know with the more units that we're producing, the lower the unit cost should be, so we're maximizing efficiency more. But the reason why we don't want it above 90% all the time, like 99% or 100%, is because it provides us still with that flexibility. Because if I was to have a large business order, but I'm already operating at maximum capacity, then I can't meet this additional level of demand. And not only that, if we are working at 100% capacity every single day, then you're really straining on your overall processes. Your equipment may break down. The people may have breakdowns where they end up getting burnt out and obviously going off sick from work. Now, let me give you some examples of how we calculate this. So let's say we produce 200,000 cars within a specific period, but we figure out that the maximal possible production is 500,000 cars. Simple calculation, 200,000, the total, my actual output, divided by the maximum output, 500,000 times 100, to get me 40%. Capacity utilization is always measured in percentage. Make sure you include those units in your exams. But I also want to help you guys develop your analysis on this. Now, when we look at capacity utilization here, we've just looked at this table because we've looked at unit costs. Now, let's say maximum capacity for this business is at that 4,000 units. So of course, when we produce 1,000 units, capacity utilization is 25%. When we produce 2,000 units, capacity utilization is 50%. When we produce 3,000 units, 3,000 divided by 4,000 times 100, capacity utilization is at 75%. And of course, if we're producing at 4,000 units, we're producing at capacity, our capacity utilization is 100%. But what I want you to take a careful note of is the relationship between capacity utilization and unit costs, because what we can see here is that as capacity utilization increases, our unit costs fall. Why? That magic sentence again, because our fixed costs are spread over more units, which reduces our unit costs. The next topic that we're going to go through in this revision video will be about lean production. Now, I want to give you a bit of a history lesson of where lean production actually came from. Now, lean production originated in Japan after World War II. And it originated from Toyota. Now, as you could imagine, after World War II, Japan's economy wasn't in the best of states, because of course they were facing all the repercussions after the war. Now, after World War II in Japan, there was a lot of resources that were becoming scarce, such as steel, such as any other manufacturing resources. And this actually gave the birth of lean production, because what Toyota realized is that the resources that they did have, they couldn't exactly waste them, because they didn't have a lot of resources anyway in the first place. So if they was wasting their resources, their business couldn't have been successful. And lean production was mainly pioneered by the Toyota's engineer, Taiichi Ono. I really hope I pronounced that right, along with some of his other colleagues. And this is where the Toyota Production System, TPS, was born. Now, essentially what lean production is all about, we want to look at maximize efficiency and also eliminate waste. Now, when we think about waste within a business, this can take many different forms. This could be wasted resources, defected and faulty products. It could be wasting time, and so much more. And there are two key methods of lean production that we need to learn: just in time and Kaizen. Now, Kaizen is a Japanese term which translates to continuous improvement. More on that though later in the video. And essentially how the Toyota production system worked is that we had a car manufacturing assembly line where every single employee on that assembly line had a stop button. And what Toyota wanted to do is they wanted to empower all of their employees. They wanted them to take a bit more responsibility with the quality of the processes and the products. And employees, they were able to stop the production line, not just a single part, the entire production line, if they identified a certain issue. They may have identified a defect in the product or once again in the production process. And rather than just leaving it and the employee saying, oh, that's not my job, that's not my problem, they wanted them to take responsibility and address the issue immediately. And this can seem like a really slow process because you're constantly stopping the production process, you're starting it again, you're stopping it, working on the issues. But over the long term, Toyota have had so much success from this. In fact, they actually became the first company to produce over 10 million vehicles in a single year, and that was back in 2012. So what is lean production all about? It's a manufacturing approach focused on minimizing waste and maximizing efficiency. And one of the main strategies that came from lean production was just in time. Now, just in time, this is when the business only receives the input, and when I talk about input, I mean stuff like raw materials, exactly when they are needed, just in time when they are needed within the production process. So the main aim for just in time is not to hold on to any excess inventory. We only want to receive the inputs as they are needed. So how this is lean production is because think we're minimizing waste by only receiving the inputs exactly when you need them. Products aren't going out of date. We aren't holding on to excess inventory. We also aren't wasting time waiting either. So what we find is that the levels of waste begins to go down. And this can also be quite beneficial for a business because if we now don't need to hold on to excess amounts of inventory, well, the business can look at downsizing. We can move to smaller production facilities. And why just in time can be quite useful for businesses is because we're not holding on now to excess amounts of inventory. Therefore, we can move to smaller warehouses. And of course, our fixed costs can begin to reduce as a process of this. Now, just in time, it may seem like a really good strategy. However, in order for it to work, first of all, you need to have good relationships with the key stakeholders. Firstly, you need to make sure that you have good employees because your employees, they have to be on top of their games. You know, they must ensure that the production process is working more or less perfectly because you can't afford for any delays in your demand. Also as well, your suppliers. Suppliers have to be reliable in order for them to deliver the raw materials exactly as you need them. So there's a lot of pressure on these two stakeholders. Now, yes, just in time, you can save fixed costs because you're not having larger warehouses. However, you may have to spend more money on suppliers. And if you didn't want to adopt this strategy of just in time, you can opt for the strategy just in case. Now, just in case is pretty much the opposite for just in time. So where just in time wants to prioritize minimizing excess inventory, just in case actually wants you to hold onto a buffer stock. And the reason why we hold onto this buffer stock, well, it's just in case something happens, just in case we saw a spike in demand, just in case there was any supply disruptions. So this additional buffer stock, it acts a bit like a safety net for the business. So it means that we don't run out of any inventory, so we've always got products and services to sell. Now I'm going to go over what inventory control charts are a little bit later on in this video, but as you can see on the screen there, the buffer stock is to ensure that our minimum level is always above zero. So we still have products and services that we can sell so we don't run out of stock. Just a quick one, if you are looking for a bit more support with A-level business, whether that's improving your confidence with the content or giving you more support around your exam technique, I run a tutoring program that gives you all the support that you need for your A-level business exams, whether you are in year 12 or year 13. As we offer one-to-one support, small group sessions, online courses, online resources, messaging support, and so much more. If you want to apply for the tutoring program, feel free to check out the links in my bio. Back to the video. The next topic that we're going to take a look at in this revision video will be the difference between labour and a capital intensive approach. Now, first of all, let's understand what we mean by capital intensive. Whenever you think of the word capital in operations, think of stuff like machinery and equipment. So when we look at a capital intensive approach within our production process, within our production approach, we are looking at relying more on machinery and equipment to help build our products and services. And you'll find that car manufacturers, they typically have more of a capital intensive approach. So companies like Tesla, VW, Audi, Ford and Toyota. Now having a capital intensive approach can be quite beneficial for a business. Now what you'll find with using automation and machinery is that this can operate at higher efficiency levels, which improves the business's overall productivity. Now as we know, as productivity levels tend to increase, this can help reduce the business's unit cost. So we can be seen as more profitable. And not only that, when we look at automation, this can work pretty much 24/7. It's not like employees where you have to give them weekends off and around 8 weeks off a year so they can go on their holiday. Automation pretty much works all year round. And you'll also find you're reducing the risk of human error. So when it comes to quality, when using a capital intensive approach, it tends to increase because we have fewer defects. And finally as well, it's just easier to scale our operations, because if capital can operate more efficiently than obviously people, then we can obviously use this to produce more products so we can meet higher levels of demand. But as we said, we've also got this approach of labor intensive. Now, if capital intensive is using more machinery and equipment, well, all labor intensive is that within our production approach, we're using more people rather than machinery. Now, even though there's lots of examples for the capital intensive approach, the labor intensive approach can still be quite useful for a business. Because the issue when it comes to the capital intensive approach, buying in all the different machinery and equipment, this is going to cost the business lots of money. This could cost millions, if not tens of millions of pounds. So unless you are a business that has these amount of funds, it's going to be quite tricky to get this all set up, especially for starter businesses. So actually the labour intensive approach can be seen as more cheaper. Not only that, but if we went from a labour to a capital intensive approach, yes, profitability could increase. The issue is it may be seen as unethical because you're making people redundant because all the business cares about is profitability. But labour intensive, we're providing opportunities for people so they can feed their families. And I'd say probably the biggest advantage of labour intensive is that we're able to provide more customised and personalised service. Now, of course, with the development of technology, the capital intensive approach has started to be able to do this a lot better. But we still find though with the labour intensive approach, you are still able to provide more customization and more of a personalized service. The next thing that we're going to do in this revision video is that I want to introduce you to quality. Now, first of all, what is quality? What is this all about? Well, essentially, all quality is the degree to which a product or service meets or exceeds our customers' expectations. Basically, we're treating quality as a measure of excellence. So, has the product or service met the expectation of the customers? Are they satisfied with this? And what you'll find is that the level of quality and pricing levels tend to have a positive correlation. So if you are offering products and services that are of higher quality, i.e. you're meeting customer expectations, they're extremely satisfied, you tend to be able to get away with charging higher prices. Which kind of makes sense anyway, because if you are delivering something of higher quality, then you're probably going to have to spend more money producing that product and service and actually delivering it. So in order for you to make a profit, you're going to have to charge a higher price point anyway. And when we look at quality specifically in operations, well, this will be determined by whether a business delivers on its targets or not. So the managers, they will be the ones who set these targets for the business. So a business with good quality operations, they will meet these targets consistently, such as reducing the level of waste. Now, how can we go about then measuring quality within business, within our operations? Well, first of all, we can look at the amount of defects that the business is producing. Now, of course, the idea within our production process is that we want zero faulty products. We want to be producing zero defects. So if you are free of defects, so if you are free of faulty products, then of course this should improve the business's quality. And you also want to make sure you're providing good value for money. Just because you set a really high price point doesn't necessarily mean that the level of quality is also good. Of course, it has to be fit for purpose. So what you say the product can deliver on, it actually can deliver on that. So for example, if we're looking at a sports car, fit for purpose would be a really nice design and of course going as fast as possible. We can also look at the reliability of the operations and of the business. So is it consistently delivering on good quality? We also want to look at the durability of the product. So how long does it last for? Does it break really easy? Do you provide the customers with like a 10-year guarantee, for example? And the design of the product, so is it aesthetically pleasing? and finally the delivery time. Now, how can a business actually go about improving quality? Now, we'll look at two concepts in just a moment of quality assurance and quality control. But essentially, how business can improve their quality, first of all, providing training for their staff to make sure that their staff have the adequate level of skills to produce the products in a way that is of high quality. Of course, using technology as well, so whether that's machinery or equipment for maybe more precise measurements or more precise actions. Having a strong culture, which we'll talk a little bit more once again in the later units of year 13, but you want to have this culture where you want to look for continuous improvement. You know, the worst thing that you can ever hear within a company's culture is that, well, this is the way we've always done things, because it shows that the company isn't looking to continuously improve. Because what was good in terms of quality 20 years ago isn't good in quality today. And of course, you want to provide clear standards so everybody knows what type of standards they need to be working for. But we can ask the question, well, what's the point? Why should we look at improving quality? Is there even any benefits? The answer? Yes, there's several different ones actually. I think one of the main advantages of improving quality is that it helps strengthen your brand image. Because if you're delivering products that are always fit for purpose, great value for money, your customers are always satisfied, well, of course, they're going to start thinking of you in this positive way. You'll start to have more customer loyalty. And we know if customer loyalty increases, repeat purchase goes up, customer lifetime value increases. And if you have quality within your operational processes, well, in theory, you should have fewer defects. So yes, even though increasing quality does tend to lead to an increase in total costs, however, by having less waste could also help reduce costs. So that could be your little point of evaluation in your answers. Following up from that introduction into quality, the next topic that we're going to take a look at in this revision video will be the difference between quality assurance and quality control. Now, let's have a look at defining each along with why they can be quite useful. First of all, though, let's have a look what quality control is. Now, all quality control is when we regularly check and test the products throughout the production process in order to try and identify and correct any defects, any faulty products. Now, the key difference between quality control and quality assurance, quality control is more of a reactive process, whereas quality assurance is more of the proactive process. Reactive process in this way because we find a faulty product, we then react to it and look at improving the quality. Now let's see an example of how this would work using a car manufacturing business. Now remember, all quality control is we're checking the quality of our products at different stages in the production process. So we could look at it in the raw materials. So once we get the raw materials in, we just test the quality of them. It could be partway through the production process. However, typically most of these quality checks are done at the very end of the production process before reaching the end consumer. So it's quite good because if we're testing the quality of our product, it helps prevent those faulty products going to our end consumers. Now, if we're producing millions and millions of units every single day, it's going to be impossible for us to test every single product. So what we may do, we may look at testing samples. Now, what we would do is we would take a product from that sample and compare it to a standard level of quality products. And from there, we should be able to identify these defects. And then, as I said, with quality control, it's a reactive way to improve quality. Because we want to think, well, how has this problem actually happened? How has this defect occurred? Then we want to try and identify the cause of the defect. Now, it's quite good because, as we said, we're looking at how preventing the amount of defect products going to your end consumer. But it can actually lead to a lot of waste because if you've waited all the way to the end of the production process, you finally then just identify that, oh, we've got a load of faulty products. Most of them are going to have to go into the bin. So actually you've ended up wasting quite a lot of resources. However, we also have this second approach called quality assurance. Now, as I've said, quality control is a reactive process, whereas quality assurance is more of a proactive process. Now, what we want to do with quality assurance, we want to build quality into the production processes and we want to prevent waste from even occurring. Now, I will give you guys a few more notes of how this would work. Now, it's going to be essential for the business to actually set the quality standards and goals. But the problem is, if we was to do this internally, well, our measurement of quality could be completely different to our consumers. Because we may say, oh, this product is amazing, it's of good quality, and it gets to our end consumers and they're like, what on earth is this? This is really poor quality. So what we want to do is we want to invite those customers in. We want to communicate with them, get them involved with setting those standards of quality levels. And from those conversations, we start to establish those measurable criteria to align with our customer expectations. Then we want to look at designing our processes and procedures. Now, as I said, we want to build quality into the production process. Now, for this to work, it can't just be a select group of people who care about quality. It can't just be the managers or the inspectors. We want to make sure that everybody within the business, every single employee embodies this culture of quality. Well, then we need to provide training for them because we want to prevent this mindset of our employees of, oh, that's not my job, that's not my problem. Instead, we want to empower our employees. We want to give them that level of responsibility where they care for the work that they're doing, that they're really focused on the quality standard that the business sets. Now, of course, if we empower, so non-financial method of motivation, it's intrinsic motivation. We're providing them with more responsibility. We can give a bit of a shout out to Hertzberg's two-factor theory. This should help motivate our employees. And the reason why we want to provide them then with more training is because if they're taking on more responsibility when it comes to quality, they need the right skills to be able to do so, to check their own work. You know, if a product gets to them in the production process, they look at it and like, what on earth has happened here? This product has loads of faults with it. They can send it back. Or they can look at working it on themselves. And quality assurance links quite nicely with our lean production, with Kaizen of continuous improvement. Now, if it's continuous improvement, that doesn't mean do it once, improve it once, and then we're good to go. It means we need to continuously improve it. We need to conduct regular reviews and how we can improve the processes. And once again, not just with the managers, but with all the employees. Because the whole point of quality assurance is we want to prevent defects from even happening in the first place. We want to build in quality into the processes, and we want to make sure all stages of production are consistent with good quality. Now, of course, this can be a brilliant thing because if you're preventing defects, you're minimizing your waste. The only problem is it's going to be expensive. You're training staff more. They're taking on more responsibility. So of course, in the short term, your costs may actually begin to rise. The next topic that we're going to take a look at in this revision video will be the different methods a business can use in order to match their supply with their demand. Now, let's go over those two key terms. Now, we've already looked at what the concept of demand is. Essentially, it's how many people are willing to buy a product or service at a given price point. And what we mean by supply is just the level of supply, how many products or services a business is willing to produce, once again, at a given price point. And on the screen here, you can see our typical supply and demand graph. Now, we have our supply and demand curves. I know they're not curves, they're straight lines. We just need to know this for A-level business. So with our demand, we have an inverse relationship. So this relates onto the law of demand, what we learned at price elasticity of demand. Essentially, when the price goes up, level of demand goes down because people are less willing to pay for products at higher price points because they just can't afford it as much. But of course, when prices get cheaper, the demand should go up because it becomes more affordable. But when we look at the relationship now between supply and price, we have a positive relationship. And this makes sense because if a business is able to sell each product for more, then they want to be producing more units. But of course, if a business would only make 10p a product, then they're not really going to be that willing to make as many products. And then we have our market equilibrium, which is where our supply and demand curves cross. So we can see within the specific market, whatever products or services they're selling, at £5 a unit, this is where our supply and demand match one another, and we are producing and we have a demand for 10,000 units. Now, a business will need to make sure that they match their supply with their demand because they want to first of all avoid overstocking. For example, if their supply is a lot higher than their demand, i.e. not many customers are wanting to buy their products, they're just left with excess amount of inventory that no one wants to buy. And of course, that contributes to waste. But of course, we don't want our demand being also higher than our supply because we're missing out then on opportunities. We're running out of stock. So we want to make sure that we match these two concepts together. And we've got 3 ways of doing so. We've got outsourcing, using temporary and part-time staff, and we've also got producing to order. Let's break each of these down. Starting off with outsourcing. Now, what we mean by outsourcing is that this is the practice of hiring external companies, i.e. we're bringing in another company for them to perform tasks, services, or produce part of the good on our behalf. So rather than myself, my own business, trying to invest lots of money in order to increase my own supply, what we are doing is we're using these external businesses to help us do so. Now, companies will use outsourcing in different ways. So for example, we could do it within our marketing. We may outsource the marketing activities to a marketing firm. We could also look at outsourcing our financial management. So outsourcing any financial management of the business to an accounting agency. And we can also look at outsourcing our manufacturing. Now, a great example is that Boeing, they outsource the engine manufacturing to companies like Rolls-Royce. So rather than Boeing producing every single component, they're using other companies to do so for them, which can be quite good because it allows companies like Boeing to focus on their core competencies. The second way of matching our supply and demand, we could also look at using temporary and part-time staff. Now, first of all, what we mean by part-time staff is that they're working less than full-time. So essentially, they're working less than 30 hours a week. And temporary staff is when we bring in employees just for a short period of time. Now, the reason why we have temporary and part-time staff is that we bring them in when demand increases. Now, as you can see here, on the weekends, the business's level of demand typically increases. Could be a restaurant, for example. So the good thing about hiring these part-time and temporary staff is that, well, when the demand is higher, we can also increase our level of supply. We can increase the number of workers working on those different shifts. And what is also really good about having temporary and part-time staff is that when the demand levels begin to reduce, well, we don't have full-time employees. We can just say to the workers, well, we don't need you now for this shift. So what happens is that the business starts managing their costs more effectively. And the final way of matching supply with demand is producing to order. Now, kind of in the name, when we look at producing to order, this is a manufacturing approach where products are only made once we've got a customer order in. Essentially, we're not holding on to any excess stock. And the producing to order typically aligns quite well with our just-in-time approach. So rather than me producing loads and loads of products and then never end up selling it because the demand isn't there, we only ever produce products once we have that demand. So, for example, how this works, we could look at placing an order with the business, they then start manufacturing the product, and then they send it to the customer. And a great example of where produce to order works really well is within restaurants. Because a restaurant wouldn't produce loads of different plates of food in the hope that customers are ordering it. Instead, what they do is they only produce your meal after the customer has ordered it. The next topic that we'll take a look at in this revision video will be our inventory control chart. Now, this is what an inventory control chart looks like. Don't worry, I know there's lines going here, there, and everywhere. We're going to break this down so it's really simple to understand. But essentially, the main purpose of these inventory control charts is that you want to monitor and optimize your inventory levels over time. It's a bit like the Goldilocks effect. You don't want too much inventory, but you also don't want too little. The reason why you don't want too much is because products and services may end up going to waste. You may not sell every single product that you have. But you also don't want too little because you don't want to run out of stock, have a negative reputation from customers, and of course not make any revenue. But what else is really good with these inventory control charts is that they help you with your reordering decisions. Now, just to point your attention to, on our y-axis we have the stock level. All we mean by stock is the products and services that are ready to be sold to your customers. And of course, on the x-axis, we have time. And that blue line, which is a bit of a zigzag going up, then down, that is our level of stock. So we've got different areas on this inventory control chart, starting with the reorder level. It's quite simply within the name. All the reorder level is a predetermined point at which a business decides to place order for additional stock. Essentially, it's a trigger for new orders because it'll help ensure that the company has enough stock. Now, we want to take into account the lead time, which is essentially how long it takes for our products to get from the suppliers to our business. And this will be influenced by demand. Now, of course, the more demand we have, the higher the reorder level should be. But the slower demand, the lower the reorder level should be. Next up we have is the minimum level, which once again is just the minimum level. It's the lowest quantity of a particular item that a business should hold in its inventory. Next up, we have the lead time. Now, the lead time, this is the time interval between placing an order for that inventory and when that inventory is actually received at the business. And this is going to be so essential for maintaining optimal inventory levels. Now, your lead time is going to be influenced with who your suppliers are. So when we look at our suppliers potentially being from overseas, yes, could be good because we're getting cheaper labor costs, improving the business's profitability. But of course, the lead time begins to increase. And as well, lead time is going to be so important in our just-in-time, because realistically, we want that lead time to be as short as possible because we need reliable suppliers, especially if we're producing to order. The next one we have is the reorder quantity. This is just how much you've ordered, the amount of stock a business has ordered in order to replenish its inventory. And then finally, we have our buffer stock. Now, I didn't draw this on the original graph. However, I have mentioned this earlier on in this revision video with the just-in-case strategy. Now, what we mean by buffer stock is that this is extra inventory kept just in case we have unexpected levels of demand, we have delays in supply, or there's other uncertainties. So the idea with our buffer stock is that we want to prevent running out of stock. It's our safety net. And the very last thing that we need to do now in this revision video is about managing our supply chain. First of all, let's understand what we mean by the supply chain. So this is the network of activities, organizations, people, resources, and information involved, all in creating a product and helping us deliver it to the final customer. So when you think of the supply chain, you need to think of absolutely everyone involved, from getting the raw materials all the way to delivering the product to the customer. So let's say, for example, we're looking at producing an iPhone. Well, Apple doesn't do this all themselves, because first of all, they need to source the raw materials, so the metal, the glass that is used for their products. Then they would need to get that sent to the assembly line, where of course in that assembly process, they're producing and manufacturing the product. Then we need to look at packaging the products and then finally sending it out to the end consumer. Now in this entire production process, Apple may be using tens of thousands of different companies. So how can a business then go about managing their supply chain effectively? Well, first of all, you want to make sure you have strong relationships with all of your suppliers and the key stakeholders involved. So focus on building long-term relationships. So securing in long-term contracts with your suppliers and giving them a fair price. Also, you want to make sure you're using technology and software to track our inventory. Now, I've shown you what an inventory control chart is, and as we said, it helps us with our reordering decisions. Now, realistically, you don't have an individual drawing that inventory control chart out. You have systems and software doing it for you. You want to include automation so decisions are made a lot quicker. You also want to make sure you're diversifying the suppliers that you're using, because let's say, for example, in my company, I'm only working with one supplier. Well, what happens if they go under? What happens if they go bankrupt? If I've been relying on them to get all of my supplies, that's going to of course negatively impact me. So you want to work with lots of different suppliers. Of course, implementing inventory management systems like just in time, like we've already gone through in this session. And finally, being ethical, because it's not just about your ethical actions, it's also about the actions of your entire supply chain. So you want to make sure the companies that you're working with have good environmental and ethical standards. Now, if you want to continue your revision for your A-level business exams, I highly recommend you check out our video here on Unit 5, Finance, because we're going to go through some of the main concepts and calculations that you need to know for your exam, including break even, calculating profitability. We'll also look at cash flow. We'll also look at the different methods of finance, our internal and external methods, and much more. I really do hope these videos have been helping you with your revision. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.